On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Hello everybody, I'm Hennis, and welcome to my show about mystery animals and other things. Mr. John, what have we got in today's show?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode and next week's episode, we meet up with our old friend Colin Schneider from Ohio, who's going to tell us all sorts of things about the weirder end of Fortean Zoology, and we're going to take a deep dive into the story of the Beast of Bladenboro.
I really like the old credits.
Before we get on with today's show, we have some high culture, courtesy of the doyen of the English country garden.
Ahem. Poetry spot. The elephant of Celebes has sticky yellow bottom grease. The elephant of Sumatra always fucks his grandmama. The elephant of India cannot find the hole. Ha ha!
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and in the background you can hear the Centre for Fortean Zoology little dog, Archibald.
Hello everybody, it's Archie and I'm a very good boy.
Who is barking? Because my dear nephew, Henry, and his mate, Brogan, are outside trying to fix and, if necessary, move my car. That something unspeakable has happened to the ignition lock, and this is something that is far beyond my control. I can talk quite knowledgeably about things like the Owlman. I can talk quite knowledgeably about the Loch Ness Monster. I can talk quite knowledgeably about how to get a little dog to be quiet.
I'm just protecting the house, Dad. There might be malefactors outside.
But what I can't do is talk even slightly knowledgeably about the inner workings of a Volkswagen Touran. So please forgive me if the dog continues to bark and there's strange noises from outside the window. Welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you who don't know, On the Track is a show we put out every Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock for about half an hour. And it is augmented by, and if you want to see, there's a little dog there barking, it is augmented by a show we put out every Wednesday evening at 6:30 called On the Track Extra, which is about the same as On the Track but half the length. And then on the last Wednesday of every month, and the day I'm recording this is actually the day after the last Wednesday of every month, we have a show called The Last Wednesday of the Month Show, in which we take deep dives into various bits of Fortean Zoology, together with a panel consisting of Ian Squibbs, V. McCrinnan, Dave Scott. And it's usually hosted by me and the lovely Viv Powell, but sadly Viv is on the sick list at the moment, so it was just me last night. as we spoke to our special guest, whose name is Steve Ward, about the stuff he does in conjunction with the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And we had a smashing time. Thanks again, Steve, for coming on the show. And if you want to see it, you can see it on CFZ TV, where it is streamed in perpetuity. But enough of that. Let's get on with the show. What is in this show? Well, it is a mixture, a melange, a muddle of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, the fact that you have a fat, elderly hippie wearing a Viv Stanshall smoking cap and having a long conversation with his badly behaved little dog.
I told you I'm not badly behaved, I'm very nice. It's you that's badly behaved, you silly old fool.
Who talks in a Brummy accent. Isn't that surreal enough for you? Well, if it isn't, well, tough. So, Colin, Beast of Bladenboro.
Yeah. So Bladenboro is a small town in North Carolina. North Carolina has historically some of the highest sightings of Black Panthers I've ever seen on this side of the U.S. I was able to, and I don't know if that's because they're actually high sightings or because the newspaper reports I was digging through happened to be more complete because North Carolina has a really strong like records program for their newspapers. So it was more complete than some other states in the United States. So that might account for the high number of reports I was able to find. But they have legends, stories dating back to, as far as I could tell, the early 1800s, 1810 or so. Yeah, of very specifically Black Panthers. They had a local name for them. They called them Santers, kind of a messing up of the term saunter as a reference to the way they walk, which I think is a fun detail. It's a great name.
Oh, it's great, yeah.
Yeah. Bladenboro, though, the case in Bladenboro is probably the most known of any of these and the one that's certainly gotten the most attention. For my money, I think I wrote the definitive text on it that was published a few years ago in the Animals and Men Journal. Basically, in December of 1953, Bladenboro experienced a wave of animal attacks by some unknown culprit. We're talking pigs, we're talking waterfowl, we're talking chickens, we're talking domestic animals like dogs, and there are even at least one example of the beast attacking a person. She had come out while it was attacking her dogs. It stood up all the way, saw her, and charged. She was able to get into the house before it did anything, and then it disappeared afterwards. But this was like massively publicized. I don't know, 50 winter 53 54 must have been a really slow news cycle or something, because this was talked about in just about every paper in the country for like 3 weeks straight in January of 54. Everything kind of started to wrap up at the end of February with no real solution. We had at one time over 1,600 hunters from surrounding towns and other states and other places flocking to this small little place of less than 800 people.
Wow.
And they never found what I think probably did it. So the reason I'm not going into a lot of like case specifics is because there were just about 1 to 2 killings every night for this entire like 8-week period that people were freaking out about. You know, generally they were all very consistent with their methodology of kill. If it was a smaller animal, they would have their throats bitten and then basically broken from the crush force. If they were larger, you would see the back of their neck being bitten and slash marks along the sides of the animal until they would drop. And often these animals weren't eaten, they weren't dragged anywhere to be cached. They were generally just dropped and left, which made a lot of people panic about it. Add into the fact that a lot of the bites were on the necks. People went, "Oh my God, it's got to be a vampire cat," because people were at the same time reporting a large, fluffy black cat around. There were thoughts even that there were two of them because there were some size discrepancies. One was being reported as about 4 foot long, and one was being reported at about 6 feet long. So they had assumed that, of course, it must be a male and a female, and they must have a cub somewhere. Um, you know, the thing is, I don't think there was any vampirism happening. I don't think that there was anything unusual happening. I think that more than likely it was a rogue cougar. I think that looking at the methodology of its kills, it was very consistent with mountain lions. We know that even Western mountain lions, because at the time, Eastern cougars had been wiped out for about, I don't know, 4 decades at that point. Um, so I think it was more than likely a rogue cougar who had just wandered over looking for mates, looking for food. We know this will happen. There was one that had a tracking chip that we found, oh gosh, I think about 15 years ago, had went from the edge, the corner of Washington State, all the way over to Connecticut before it got hit by a semi truck. And its journey ended. There's actually a wonderful book about it that I don't remember its name, unfortunately. But like we know for a fact they'll come over. I think personally that it happens a lot more. I spent years cataloging and tracking these cases of livestock attacks in the eastern United States, and they're very predominantly consistent with cougar attacks in a lot of ways. As for explaining the vampire stuff, I think that the process of lividity pretty much cancels out any supposed blood sucking happening. As a body cools, its blood will pool and gelatinize at the center of gravity and make it so you can't, unless you're a professional who has been trained in this, you can't really tell if it's got blood in it or not. The sites are all dried up. It doesn't seem to have anything coming out, and they're even if you like cut into the animal, the blood won't like pour out, like in a movie. And it can be really hard to identify it as such. And the only folks that were really investigating these things were farmers or local laymen or guys who were experienced in human corpses, not necessarily animal corpses. And while lividity isn't terribly different across the board, it is an added factor to think about when you're dealing with something you're not familiar with, if that makes any
Yeah, of
sense.
course.
I find the story really fascinating though, because the vampire cat of Bladenboro is just a bundle of fun, and Bladenboro is a wonderful name for there to be a vampire at. They have a whole vampire festival every year. The local
They
high
do?
schools. Yeah, Vampire
That's
Beast Festival.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's long been something I'd like to go visit. I want to get a Bladenboro Beast t-shirt. Uh, they have their local high school, the vampire cat is their mascot actually, which is wonderful. Um, Interestingly enough, there's been about a half dozen like later Bladenboro attacks. A couple years after the initial one, there were a handful of hogs that were killed in basically the same method, and for a few weeks that sparked up another panic, but it didn't happen past that. No additional kills were found, and it just kind of petered out. In 2013, there was a guy that wrote an article for one of those old blogs that you wrote articles and they published and they would pay you for the views, which only kind of exists anymore. He hoaxed a case in 2013 where a pair of horses were killed. I was able to track down the pictures that he used of the horses. There were two pictures, one where the horse is very clearly wet and laying on the ground, and like matted and beat up. And there were a couple guys standing and squatting near it and looking at the animal. And then the other picture was from the top of like a hill looking down on a valley, and there were several horses laying on the ground. And I was able to track both those images down to, ironically, your neck of the woods. Um, Both of those were from two different examples of horses still being alive. Actually, the one in the valley where the person's on the top of a hill was actually just from a blog that this local rancher has, where he writes about his farm and writes about his animals and stuff, and he just has horses that happen to like to lay and bask in the sun. And I found the article, or the blog post that he had in it. I emailed him. I'm like, hey, do you know that this guy is saying your horses are dead in North Carolina? And he goes, what? He filed a report and got the whole blog post taken down, actually, because he was using his copyrighted images without permission. The other image with the horse all wet and matted and beat up was from an example of a horse that had fallen into a British river. And excuse me, I do not remember which river, and had taken about a 2-mile journey down the river and gotten beat up in the water and everything, but survived. And the picture was from the article when a few locals and the local police chief had been able to fish it out of the water. The horse is still alive today, as far as I can tell. So neither of them were North Carolina, and neither of them were killed. But when you look up, Beast of Bladenboro, that case is mentioned constantly, and I'm like, it's not that. There's been all kinds of wonderful, not wonderful, but fascinating examples of livestock attacks in the United States that weren't the chupacabra, because that's the big one everybody always runs with and assumes, but they predate it by quite a bit, and it's weird how similar a lot of them are. Sorry, I've been going on.
No, please go on, because this is something that fascinates the hell out of me.
This is a result of me having been giving lectures on this topic for about almost a decade now, as well as having my own radio show for years. I'm very good at talking. Another favorite that I've been doing a bit of further digging on, because I found a little thing that has kind of broken the case a little open for me, and I've been fascinated, is, you may be familiar with this. Do you know the abominable chicken man of El Reno, Oklahoma?
You're kidding.
No, it's not what you think. I promise. It's a Bigfoot story. It's a Bigfoot story. But that's what they call him, is the chicken man. So give me 1 sec, I'll get the year. December 70, El Reno, Oklahoma, right? At first it was an unnamed farmer, but I was able to track down, and I'm pretty sure I found his name. So an unnamed farmer, newspaper stories. They were all kind of, in one article was written and then republished and reposted across several newspaper systems, because they would do that sometimes, to just kind of fill spaces. Oh no. So there's several cases of Bigfoot taking livestock. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm so sorry. El Reno, Oklahoma farmer, December 1970. Is sitting in his house. He hears his chicken coop, which wasn't too far off from his house, getting attacked. He hears squawks, panic in the chickens, them going crazy. In the time that he heard it, turned off his television, got up, put his boots on, opened the door, and walked to his chicken coop, which, for it to have been so close that he could hear it, it couldn't have been that far for him to walk.
No.
In that time, he found all 150 some chickens gone out of his coop, no sighting of anything that had taken them. And instead he saw a mass of blood, feathers everywhere, and a single bloody handprint on the chicken coop's door, which was ripped off.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
not for the chickens.
So I've done some digging, and I am confident to say that I think the story was made up. And I have a few reasons why. So the crux of this story is involving a zoo director named Lawrence Curtis. Lawrence was the curator and director of the Oklahoma City Zoo for like 20 some years. And he was the current at the time. He was contacted by the farmer because the handprint looked weird. And the farmer wanted to know, he's like, this looks like an ape handprint. What is it? Lawrence Curtis determined that to him it looked like a non-human, non-known ape. He then contacted everybody in the press he possibly could have to talk about this story and made a temporary exhibit in the zoo with the handprint door that he kept in his office and then moved out onto exhibit and then moved it back to his office and kept it there until he retired or until he left the zoo. Some things that were important to note is that at the time the Oklahoma City Zoo was seeing all-time low attendance. Curtis had been told that it is more than likely that he will either be removed or that the zoo will be shut down if this couldn't be reversed. Attendance was at an all-time high after the Chicken Man incident. The fact, additionally, he never really let anyone else examine the door, to my knowledge, like any professional, any cryptozoologist. I know Lauren Coleman reached out to him a few times and was like, this is interesting. Can I see it? To which Curtis would consistently say no. And I also am not certain if we actually have an image of the door itself. We have replications that Curtis did of kind of, drawing over the print to kind of get an idea of what the hand looked like. We have that. And we also have what I was able to find on...
Here, Colin talks about this photograph and explains why he believes it is a fake. He also names names and names the person that he thinks was responsible. Here's the person that he believes is responsible is still alive, and there are several members of the team here who know him personally. So we are redacting that bit.
So I don't know how much I trust that image itself, especially because I couldn't find it anywhere else. It is also worth noting that in the mid-'80s, Lawrence Curtis was removed from the position at the Oklahoma City Zoo for fraud. He, from what I was able to gather, had taken money that he wasn't supposed to for himself and had illegally bought a pair of white tiger cubs, which I'm actually wearing a white tiger shirt right now, a pair of white tiger cubs from an illegal sorcerer in the Middle East.
Bloody hell.
He then immediately leaves the United States for the rest of his life to live and run the private zoo of one of the princes of Saudi Arabia.
Is this guy still alive?
He is not. He died 6 months ago. I am so disappointed.
So we're not slandering.
No. And these are all things you can find online. I had to do some digging, and I was able to find a documentary that interviewed him and talked about the Chicken Man a little bit, and that's where I got the information about him contacting everybody and him having the door up on display for a little while. The documentary it wasn't even about that. The documentary, it was part of a series PBS did about significant and important zoo directors and curators in the United States. Which picking him I thought was interesting, but I'm not going to argue with me getting the information, which led to me finding some articles about where he ended up working after leaving the zoo and why he ended up leaving the zoo. The interesting thing is, so I've tried to reach out to his son, who is still alive and still in Oklahoma, as far as I can tell. He is unfortunately, as far as I can tell, either in prison or on home arrest because he was illegally keeping exotic animals in ways that were illegal and kinds of exotic animals that were illegal. I think Oklahoma has some specific laws involving the caretaking of venomous reptiles, and he had a couple hundred in a shed in his backyard, all of which is very illegal in multiple ways.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there we're going to leave it for this week. But never fear, Colin will be back next week with the rest of the story, and what a story it is. Now, before we go, I want to show you something. Because earlier on I was explaining how the dog was barking because one of my adopted nephews, Henry Wadham, whose brother Harry is the person who does the accounts for CFZ Press, and both of them and their other brother have been friends of mine, and I've been Uncle John to them for many, many years. However, Henry was outside with his mate Brogan trying to get rid of the steering lock. They managed to break it off, but they found that the damage wasn't actually the steering lock. It was much further down the steering column. We needed to buy a new piece of part, which I bought for 35 quid using my PayPal account. And interestingly, this was the part that the company that I spoke to on the phone yesterday wanted to charge me 350 quid for. However, that's another story. They then went down to our local garage to try and book the car in for a time when the part will have arrived so that they can fix it and install it, because although they could install it, they don't have the software to make the key work properly. So it has to be done by an official garage. So they went down there, and the garage kindly said that we could take the car down there today and leave it there until it manages to get fixed in about a fortnight's time. Well, this is a bit of a bummer because I'm now without a car for 2 weeks when I need to get to the hospital twice a week, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Hopefully we'll be able to get some kindness out of the district nurse's office, but we won't know that until tomorrow. But the next bit was the interesting bit, because in order to get the car down there, they had to try to move it, and it started off with them trying to push the car using Henry's car from behind. Have a look at this.
Like I said, the aim is to try it backwards now, being a front wheel drive. Hopefully we'll get less spin.
But that didn't work, so they ended up having to pull it up the hill. Now, it would have been probably okay if Henry had had a proper tow rope, but we didn't. So, Graham got some nylon rope that he's been using in the garden, folded it over, doubled and redoubled it, and used that. However, that broke near the top of the hill, and Brogan ended up pushing it up the hill in his Jaguar. Well, I don't know if it's just me, but I found this last bit in particular massively funny, which is why I wanted to share it with you. It's not the first time in CFZ history that we've used a Jaguar in unorthodox fashion, and I suspect it won't be the last. And it's rather gratifying when I am approaching pensionable age. I'm 66 next month, and it is really rather gratifying to know that the CFZ are, as a famous American Fortean once described us, still a bunch of pirates, and that we are still, as the Clash once called themselves, the last gang in town.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, says,
Don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you'll miss the new episodes.
and that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
If you've been affected by any of the topics in today's episode, you can just bugger off, because we don't give a monkeys. Bloody well get a grip. Sort your own bloody problems out rather than ringing up somewhere.
That was a public information film.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to say a very big thank you to everybody involved in putting this episode together, particularly my guest, Colin Schneider, and the special and unplanned appearances by Harry Wadham and his mate Brogan. And I want to say a big thank you to Graham, who, as well as helping to push the Volkswagen up the road, did some of the filming and did all sorts of other things, as he always does, behind the scenes. I want to say a big thank you to Helen, who, together with Graham, changed the dressing on my foot the other day when I couldn't get to the hospital, and no doubt will be doing it again tomorrow for the same reason. I want to say a big thank you to Miss Guinevere, who is the Assistant Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, for everything she's done, and to my producer Louis, who's still gallivanting around South Carolina doing his own inimitable thing. I wonder if I can persuade him to pay a visit to Bladenboro across the border in North Carolina in time for this year's Vampire Cat Festival, because this is something I think we really need to be filming. I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What am I doing on Wednesday? I don't know. I haven't filmed it yet. What am I doing on Saturday? Well, I think I've already told you. I'm back with Colin for the second part of our conversation. So, if you're there watching, and I'm talking to you, Mr. McCrinnan, if you're there watching the show, and I'll be there doing all the stuff I normally do on a Saturday afternoon, the live chat and notifications and all the other gubbins I do before I basically go to sleep for the rest of the afternoon, then,
Mr. McCrinnan,
I will most certainly be seeing you.